I would like to thank Philip for that wonderful address and for dealing in such depth and for highlighting the concerns of teachers in so many areas relating to our everyday work. Thank you very much, Philip, and congratulations. And I would now like to welcome our guest speaker, Senator Marie-Louise O'Donnell. Senator Marie-Louise O'Donnell studied English and Education at Nottingham University, Masters in Education at NUI Maynooth, MA in Modern Drama at UCD, and Theatre and Voice at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London. She became head of drama at Carysfort Teacher Training College, a theatre director and a professional actress. She trained in radio production, presentation and direction with the BBC in London and made and presented programmes for BBC Radio 4 for several years. As a member of the staff in DCU for 23 years, she lectured in the School of Communications. In the early 90s, she initiated the arts and culture on the young DCU University campus, culminating in the imaging, building and launch of the Helix in 2002. She was appointed to the board of the National Concert Hall for 2 terms. Marie-Louise has lectured extensively in Ireland, Europe and the US in education, Irish drama, Irish culture and languages. She has presented programmes on television and radio and is a regular reviewer and media contributor. Marie-Louise is a published writer. In May 2011, she was appointed to the Senate by the Taoiseach Enda Kenny. So please welcome our guest speaker, Senator Marie-Louise O'Donnell.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Those of you here, many of you, who have decided to hold on to the external examination process of all junior certificate subjects, practically and from a written point of view, are entirely and absolutely correct. So, well done. Well done for grasping and gripping onto the integrity of the examination process, the honesty of the examination process, the arm's length nature of the examination process, the objectivity of the examination process across our towns, our villages and our urban landscapes, and the standard and quality of our examination process. To hold on to what you know as teachers is entirely right. The Department of Education constantly and consistently accuses you, and I feel deliberately, of choking the process, of thwarting change, and of preventing and frustrating imaginative education. This is deeply false and wholly inaccurate. There is probably not one teacher sitting in front of me here today who has not created, imagined, developed, generated, crafted, constructed and invented new ways of approaching their subjects, their teaching and young students' learning. But all state examinations at second level and third level at the end of the year should be subject to external testing, and they should be done and must be done if the students are to respond, and we are to respond to their learning and be given an equal, a fair, a just and a blame-free outcome. External examination can never be undermined in any area, written or practical. I feel that is the beginning and the end of the argument. Now, the Minister knows my feelings on this, and I don't intend to change them. And I suggest, as your President has suggested, that you don't change them either. I want to thank you, President, for the privilege of being here with you this afternoon. I must also thank all the delegates for choosing a woman in black against the beautiful milky son of Kerry, because I understand we rarely see it. I want to congratulate you on all the work you do. Even with all our problems, you must be doing something right, because on any given day in Ireland, there's 1,365,000 people in education, either in preschool or in right up to mature education. I also think that you're doing a great job as recognised by the PISA rankings. I come to you this afternoon in the shoes of an educationalist. I have never, ever been able to take them off. And in the very short time I have with you, I'd like to try and ignite maybe a rough, creative conversation that's very general, but I have to be general because, like a bad writer, I cannot be short and specific. So let us ask ourselves a rough, tough question. Does all your teaching draw on and engage your young students? Does it engage their hearts and their souls and their minds and their bodies and their hands and their creativity? And of course their heads. But education is just not about people's heads or what goes on in their heads. The brain only weighs 3 pounds. Now, I'm not proposing to be anti-cognitive, but I will ask you to consider this. Have you ever met a person weighing 3 pounds? We have, I feel, invested and continue to invest far too much in left brain education. I've never met a 3-pound person outside my own hips. But we must give equal weight to head, heart, hands, body, curiosity, voice, and the imagination. Knowledge, in my opinion, on its own is quite useless. It's just a banking model of education. Freire said that. Knowledge on its own is useless because it has no fire, no body, and no presence. It is no use being like the Oxford professor who knew everything about everything and nothing about everything else. Here's another question. What sort of image of the human person and of an ideal society is embedded in what you teach and in the way you teach it? Are you aware enough, or are students aware enough of the deep political implications that surround education outside pay? The way students are taught and what they are taught serves a political agenda. Can you, for a moment, cast your minds back to your favourite inspiring teachers? So many of them still animate you was it because they filled you as empty buckets with knowledge-based facts? That's not how your fire was lit. If it was the vast array of facts that inspired you, I think it wasn't. I think it was teachers who were passionate, who committed, who radiated something like love, who took you seriously, who saw and opened up your possibilities, who became catalysts in your blossomings and unfoldings. For me, it was a teacher and teachers who put me on the right road and saved me a lot of trouble, as Paddy Kavanagh said. Teachers who sensed something hidden in you and sensed the possibilities and some way of enriching your life. And that is why I know each and every one of you are here today, to hold on to that fire and hold on to that enrichment and hold on to that belief in education. Because really it's only about teaching young people to stand up and look out. One great example in Liddell and Scott is the open-mouthed amazement expressed in a child's face when seeing a great juggler for the first time. I've always felt that in education, whether it was with 9-year-olds or 19-year-olds, that the thing was to hold on to that with the young students in front of me. So we are not knowledge transfer machines. Here's another question. How often at the end of a particularly rewarding day at school do you say to yourselves, "Boy, I'm glad I'm a teacher. I can boast of having transferred 5,000 new facts from my brain to the little empty buckets." Our students can't ever be empty buckets. That kind of education is purposeless. So here's a thought. If I gave each of you €5 million, how many of you would stay in teaching? It's a very real question about motivation and joy in our work and working in an area that you really want to be around. This afternoon, in the short time I have, I also have to stand up somewhere for the arts in education. It is the area that has put me on the right road and kind of, as Paddy Kavanagh said, saved me a lot of trouble. And I don't mean frivolous, entertaining arts. I mean the deep meaning, learned, qualitative, crafted, standard, developmental and formative art forms. The reason I think arts in education are so important is I think they're about human creativity and imagination and energy. The creative energy of art pushes up and out through music and poetry and drama and visual arts and dance and literature, the expression of self. There is a huge need now, more than ever, for human beings to be able to express creatively. If our imagination has a radical shift in perspective, it brings about it and can help us to reinvent our thinking, reinvent how we look at things. And sometimes the original problem can disappear if we look at it a different way. I think the purpose of any education is the pursuit of that individual human creative energy. And when I think of the arts, all arts, I think of that imagination and artistry and wildness and sense of play. I think our artists all over Ireland, and we keep selling them and yet we won't pay them properly, but I think they teach us to understand the world, who we are, how we need to be seen and heard and felt. And that is what I think is the core of great education. I also think they need a serious role at the political table, and they haven't had one. They don't have it, and they should have a political role at the table because they teach us to think and to feel differently. And if I can think and feel differently, I can act differently. But I think they also need to involve everybody and not be selective in both primary and secondary school. Some years ago, a London colleague of mine told me that it was drama students who were employed more often sometimes than in other disciplines. Oxford employees were more likely to give them philosophy students jobs because they had been taught to think. Recently, 3,000 CEOs were asked what was the quality they most looked for in the young interviewee, and they answered imagination. And in 1980, 8 of the world's scientific geniuses were asked what was their secret, and they all said, we keep reason and logic in second place, and we give imagination first place. So a lot of the time, that is what employers are looking for: creativity in the arts, creativity in the sciences, creativity in technology, creativity in politics, which is not there. And that is why we are all here, and that is why we are bored, and that is why we don't trust it. At the moment, certain of our methods of education also can mean nothing to many, because for many young people, their meaning world has collapsed, and they don't survive in that purposeless area. That is why community and CSSP and all those areas and social development and are so important on our curriculum, and that is why community should be a major subject on the curriculum. Because education has become so meaningless for some, the collapse of meaning. And we know that when we see the incarnation of it in young adolescent boys. Because after the survival of bread and water and housing, we all need meaning. I think the arts, again, have a huge part to play there. So here's another question. What is the colour of an apple? I was asked that recently. It's not a trick question. And I said, it's green. And then I said, well, maybe not. It's red. Well, maybe it's a bit red and yellow. And then somebody said, it's white. Well, that depends on how you want to view, understand, pursue, and judge and are motivated by the world, either internally or externally. And Dan Pink's work on external and internal motivation should be at the heart of what matters to educationalists, not money. An Oxford student asked Einstein, or said to him, I think it's disgraceful, Professor, that you set the exact same questions this year as last year. I disagree, said Einstein. Questions may be the same, but physics has moved on, and the answers are very different this year. I wonder, does the Department of Education take account of that? So I do think the arts are at the core of education, and I mean in all subjects. I just don't mean being able to play a violin. I mean in all aspects of all subjects. Let me quote you something. The arts provision for children and young people in and out of schools is a challenge in our cultural landscape. This is recognised by practitioners and policymakers, educationalists and the public alike. This is the first paragraph in the Arts Charter. It's the first paragraph. And it doesn't get any better. It doesn't really believe what it's saying, otherwise it wouldn't say it like that. If it did believe it, it would be more definite. It would have a definite arts plan. It would have a real and defined arts curriculum. It would have different stages of growth. It would have it as an independent, defined discipline. It would not tell us just why, but it would tell us how. It would be far more edifying than this unknowledgeable waffle. And it also makes distinctions between arts education and arts in education. There isn't any. They're just sisters. They're not long-distance cousins. It's also extremely badly written. If you want to stand up and look out, we must not always look to the economic graph. We must not always look to technology. But that argument is for another day. Technology is only useful if you know what you're looking for, if you were to read Noam Chomsky. Otherwise, we wouldn't need teaching or tutoring or mentoring. We would just let Google do the work. Technology and plugging something in will not teach you how to become. It is not the only source of fulfillment or creativity of purpose. I can't get that through in the Education Committee. We have to stop treating it as our only God. Which brings me nicely for 1 minute, to the power and the great power of the human voice, which I think is totally neglected, taken for granted, not taught, has become obsolete against technology, is stretched and strangled on our media, and is not considered important as literacy or numeracy, when oracy is the most important part of us, insofar as it is the expression of who we are. Voice that now neither expires nor ignites us to riot. It cannot even be heard in the theatre. That's why we don't go and we watch Breaking Bad. It is interesting that in the 17th century in France, drama and law had the same handbook. The spoken word and the spoken voice, based on the art of persuasion, rhetoric and poetry, had it at its core. I feel that the human voice is neglected on every department within every curriculum within the Department of Education. It has never been properly argued except elocution after hours. When I challenged Minister Quinn on this, he said, "Oh yes, we're going to do public speaking." A dust mite, I said to him, a dust mite. I am talking about the human voice as an instrument to be developed across the entire curriculum and as an independent discipline. Well, it's certainly a place to begin the argument here today. Since we don't even explain ourselves anymore through this instrument, it has been silenced by social media, the phone, text, email, and general computer methods. But it's still our greatest instrument and our greatest educational asset. Young people need to be able to say what they know, say who they are, express what they feel and what they want, not always write it down. I also believe that it... Thank you. Thank you. I also believe that arts education is about counteracting inertia, torpor, and apathy. It is probably the greatest army against cynicism and negativity. Cynicism now is considered an intellectual capacity. If you have a capacity for joy or use the word beauty, if you use the word vision on Vincent Brown, you might as well walk out. I think he lacks romance. But it is the greatest counteracting against what Kurt Vonnegut, a great pal of mine, called persuasive guessing. If you look at music and drama and visual art and poetry and literature as educational tools. They are important because understanding is important. And after 33 years, although I only look 37, but after 33 years, through all the disciplines of education, having taught in primary education, secondary education, and in third level education, there was no difference. The only difference was, obviously, the way I approached the subject and the age of the people in front of me. But the arts were a way in. They were always a way in to the releasing of the real personality. Tom Murphy said, the great Tom Murphy, who wrote the Geely Concert and Conversations on a Homecoming, said, "When people sing, it's only then you know who they really are." It was very interesting. The arts demand something else of us. They demand something of yourself, your ear, your eye, your voice, your hands. What is the message in your plays? An American reporter asked Brendan Behan, to which he replied, "I'm a playwright, not a fucking telegraph pole." Postman, who I know you know, one of the great writers of education who wrote the Amusing Ourselves to Death, The Death, Technopoly, The Disappearance of Childhood, is a great writer in education, died too young, was right when he said, other gods have subsumed us in arts and education. Information God, information scarcity, information glut. The long range is information chaos. It's not lack of information that keeps us at war. It's not lack of information that has people at starvation levels. We know how to grow food. It's not lack of information that brings crime rates and physical decay to our cities. It's not lack of information that keeps the suicide rate so high. But we are constantly in need of more information. What problem does it solve? How to generate and store more and more information more conveniently. We have elevated information to a metaphysical level, and we confuse information with understanding. But Shaw said that the average person today is about as credulous as the average person in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, people believed in the authority of religion. Now we believe in the authority of technology, no matter what. I would like to see the Department of Education elevate the arts to a metaphysical level. I would like to see it as a major discipline, every single one of them as an independent discipline on the school curriculum. We'd get more out of it, it'd be more lasting, and would prioritise our humanity above the machine, and we would be constantly original. Last year I argued in the Senate a private member's motion about the desecration of history, changing history from a core subject to a discrete subject on the junior cycle. That is a disgrace. It is a disgrace. History tells us who we are, what we are, how we are, and why we are. It creates citizens and not consumers. Ingersoll Snoddy said that. And if he never said anything else, before or after, it was a wonderful thing to say. Citizens, not consumers. History is not cut and paste. It is not the internet. It is not 5,000 channels. It is not Facebook and Twitter and all that nonsense of the technological revolution, the information highway, what I would call the tablets of Moses turned Apple. Technology may be the mechanics of the brain, but history is back to the mind. It is evidence and informed thought. It is outside the garbage of the information highway, the antithesis of lies on the internet, tabloid press, glut, and garbage of saturation. The government at the same time, a week ago, announced it was rolling out, as if it was talking about an apple pie, it was rolling out a new subject called politics and society on a trial basis, and at the same time it was taking history and cornering it in a short course. Now riddle me that stupidity, as another Sinn Féiner would say. I know also the government gave 25 points to Project Maths, but they didn't give it to music. And they didn't give it to visual art. And they didn't give it to geography. But they gave it to mathematics. I always know the answers. I learned this a long time ago. I always know the answers to the questions you ask. You could be in big trouble. But they did it because of computers and technology and engineering, and I'm not against it. But that is answering Google and Walmart and the banks and the economy. And that is also fine. That is also fine, because I can't live in my little illusionary world. But what about the creativity and passion and interest and talent and the other focus of young minds and young junior cert students and young leaving cert students? I think it's time the government should employ a fool. And the reason I say that, because one of the finest people I ever met in literature was the fool to Lear. He was great. A fool who did not buy into the mainstream argument or agenda, of an advisor that doesn't buy into what the minister needs to know. One of the roles of the gesture is to declare, just because you're the boss doesn't mean you know all the answers. The gesture's role is to draw attention to what things are going wrong and to stir them up. All the really important problems, I feel, were long ago solved by our ancestors. Only their solutions have been forgotten. We cannot find the solutions now because we fail in clearness of vision or in boldness of heart or in singleness of purpose. That is why we cannot find them. We keep making decisions that close us down. Porrick Pierce said that in his writings called The Murder Machine. Why are we not looking back to Steiner and Winnicott and Frere and Illich and Dewey? You all know this. They said it all before. We are made up of body and heart and hands and eyes and imagination. So the decision to give maths 25 points was against the personal creativity. Not that maths isn't creative, it is, and I don't mean that. I don't mean to isolate it as the bad boy. But how do you serve legitimate minds when you do that, when you create an apartheid around subjects? And this one is better than that one. They are not. They are all knowledge. It is the banking system of education, and it's really one of the reasons you're all here. And it's about the market and the merchants dictating how it should be won. Arts education is important at maths. Fresh understanding, fresh intellect, nature of creativity. As Nietzsche said, I can only believe in a God who dances. I agree with him. We also and I finish now, we also very quickly need to rethink and awaken ourselves to what James Hemming has vividly called the academic illusion. It enthralls us more completely than we know. We as parents, I am one, and as teachers are responsible for creating and continuing right up to the near present a kind of apartheid in education. University education versus apprenticeships. University designs the system in their own image. We all know that. I taught in one for 23 years. According to UNESCO, in the next 30 years, more people will graduate from university since the beginning of history. We define intelligence so badly, with such a tiny perspective. We ignore, as I say, creativity, and we only catch it in terms of administration. We ignore its diversity, distinctiveness, and dynamism. We are, as Ken Robinson says, somewhat living in our heads or out the side of our heads, and we operate a learned helplessness about it. Is the purpose of education to produce university professors? Is it all about academic inflation? This continues. It has somewhat abated to dominate our view of intelligence. People living in their heads. Useful subjects at the top. Students steered away from talent and passion. And we have set it up, university versus apprenticeships. And the government, 4 years ago when I came into the Senate, we were talking about apprenticeships. And it's only now beginning to somewhat take off. And even at that, in Germany, there were 320 apprenticeships. And in Ireland, we had 25. And most of them were in construction. But it's nice to see that the ESB have taken on 300 apprentices, because university has nothing to teach some people. Nothing. Some people are not well fitted for university. Some people are. Some people Very able people didn't get to university, and some of them feel undermined by it, but I couldn't run a small farm. I wouldn't be able. We have got to the stage where to educate people, stop living in our heads, and the practical application, the brilliant application of daily life. It is the one privilege I have when I go around the country with RTE and to communities and organisations and projects and people, ageless people, doing things that are unheard of and that are not on curriculums, and with the genius that comes with that energy and that ability. So the greater and more time we put into the developing of a model of apprenticeships across all skills, the more balanced we will find in defining education. And my final question: who made the decision for you to come in to become teachers? It's a very interesting question. And if I was to give you that 5 million, which of you would come up with the best story as to what you would do for the next 5 years? How many of you would stay there? And how many of you would run away? If I had a political profile in education, I don't. But if I did, Laertes for king. I said to somebody, Laertes for king? Yes. That's not in the play. Yes, it is. He just said it off stage. They just said it off stage because he couldn't get on the platform. I would make all school compulsory, pale of jail till 18. I would make the arts, music, visual art, drama, dance compulsory subjects on the primary school curriculum, secondary school curriculum, with properly trained teachers in all areas. I know they are. They're absolutely trained, but I would add to the training in certain of those areas. I would give 25 points to an art subject of a student's choice. I would also make the human voice, oral expression, communication, vocality a core subject that you could study. I would develop other school in disadvantaged areas that opens at 4 o'clock and shuts at 10. I would teach subjects like astronomy, politics, media, philosophy, Chinese, Japanese, local and national government, banks, community, religions of the world, law, and all the arts subjects. I would pay teachers extra money to teach in very disadvantaged and disaffected areas. I would pay teachers extra money. I would invite over the Finnish Prime Minister to tell us how you do it and how you put your money where your mouth is. I would try not to copy other countries. If I looked at the Young Science exhibition, I would know what we are capable of. There were 3 or 4 people started that. And maybe some of them are here in this audience. It is unparalleled, unmatched brilliance, Young Scientist exhibition. We did that. I would find out, what do young people need to know in order to understand how the world became what we perceive it today? And how can this budget and my involving ideas facilitate it? And I would, as one of the most radical thinkers in education, Neil Postman, said, I would ask young people and parents and teachers to have a common narrative. The question is, do we have a common narrative? The answer is, at the moment, we don't. Because somebody is not listening. They're not listening. We must have a common narrative, and the Department of Education is not listening, and it has to listen. We have money for the banks. We will have it for education, or we will not listen to them. In the end, it doesn't matter what you cover. It only matters what you discover. I ask, before I leave you, not to rest on your laurels, but to keep your eyes fixed on what might be. I ask you to ask yourselves what great teachers and great ideas brought you into education. And I ask you never to quench that fire that once ignited your imagination. I say to each and every one of you that I live in the hope that you will have again the rightful place, a monetary place in the sun, like the Philly and the bards of years ago. And I will leave you with a thought from the outstanding genius that we miss most of all, who is Seamus Heaney. I rhyme, he said, or I speak to see myself, to set the darkness echoing. That is what education is, sets the darkness echoing, and is what the arts do. When he wrote the poem Digging, he said of it that it was his first real poem. It was the first time, he said, where I had felt I had done more than make an arrangement of words. I felt that I had let down a shaft into real life. And that is what education and arts do. Let down a shaft into real life. Bear with the present. What will be, will be. The future is cloth waiting to be cut. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Louise. What a wonderfully inspiring and refreshing address from a guest speaker. Sincere thanks. Gurv Mila Mahagut as a lehéad the kaint, co-spragul, and we are lucky to have an ally such as Marie-Louise in our Senate. I would now like to call on our immediate past President, Sally Maguire, to receive the Presidential Medal from our current President, Philip Erman.